Hey everyone, it's Lindsay. I am here for week 3 to talk about the daily stress of life and how using a wrap, what is a wrap, and how using that wrap can help you to deal with the everyday sort of stress of life. So one of the things that I said the first week of class is that not everybody is mentally ill, but everybody has mental health. And so part of that is that we all have stressors in life. Some days are good, some days are bad. If you have mental illness, that is an additional sort of layer of what things can happen when they're good or bad, and we'll talk about mental illness in the coming weeks. But my first sort of part of this is, what is the difference between sort of mental illness and just sort of the daily ups and downs, regular parts of life? I have 2 different sort of perspectives to show in different videos, talking about how we as a society have over medicalized a lot of different sort of things, rather than saying like, yeah, it's okay to be sad sometimes, it's okay to be mad, it's okay to have good days and bad days. And that's actually different than mental illness. Mental illness is a persistent sort of thing. And again, we'll go through that later in the semester, but all of us have mental health that we have to safeguard. And all of us have things that we need to struggle with and challenge. And we don't have to be happy all of the time. There's this idea of toxic positivity where everything has to be so happy all the time. And that's just not real life, right? In real life, we get mad, we get sad, we get upset, we get frustrated, we have all these sort of things. And it doesn't necessarily mean we're having a mental health crisis. It just means, yeah, maybe we're having a really bad day, but more and more of society is being sort of medicalized. And so both of the videos that I have listed on the slides are talking about that sort of concept. Another concept that I want to introduce is the idea of neurotypical versus neurodivergent. So neurotypical, oftentimes we just abbreviate to NT, has no absolute sort of medical or psychological meaning. It's not something that is characterized. It's much more of a term that has evolved because of the opposite of neurotypical, which is neurodivergent. Rather than saying like people who are neurotypical are normal or they have, regular brains, that is pretty stigmatizing. And so instead we say neurotypical, meaning there's no inherent sort of difference. Their brain works as we expect it to in society. They are able to face sort of challenges. They behave in the ways that we sort of expect. Whereas neurodivergent are people whose brains works a little bit differently. The reason that neurodivergence is really an important sort of term to know, because it says that it isn't anything necessarily wrong with somebody who is neurodivergent. It doesn't mean that they're defective. It doesn't mean that they're bad. It doesn't mean that they're broken. It doesn't mean that they have any sort of thing. It just means their brain works differently than what we would expect sort of typical people to be able to function as. This first sort of evolved from people who had autism. We know that people with autism are on a spectrum and that they have lots of different sort of capabilities. And the idea being that just because you have autism doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means your brain works a little bit differently. And so sometimes the world is a little harder for you to navigate. We've expanded neurodivergent to encapsulate other people with mental illness or other sort of things, with brain injuries, to say, hey, there's something going on with their brain that makes their brain work a little bit differently. Again, they're not bad. They're not, broken. They're not any of those sort of things. They're just different. And so they might need more accommodations. They might need to have different expectations about navigating the world. And so for a lot of people, this is a good way to differentiate between, is this somebody who we expect to have sort of typical functioning in the world? We can kind of anticipate how their sort of life trajectory is going to go, versus somebody who's neurodivergent might have a different sort of path and might have different sort of things that they have to work through. Myself, I consider myself neurodivergent. I have several different mental illnesses. I'm still a professor. I'm still well liked most of the time. I'm still a professional. I still do sort of stuff. I got married. I have a house. I have all these animals. But my brain does not work in the ways that is very typical for a lot of people. And so I consider myself neurodivergent. I'm struggling with a lot of mental illness, and mental health sort of challenges, but I'm not defective. I'm not broken. I'm just a little bit different. And so luckily my wife accepts that of me, and we have a really great relationship. Because she's neurotypical. And so she helps to guide me through a lot of different sort of complexities of life. When talking about sort of our role as health educators, as health administrators, people who are in helping professions as we go throughout sort of time, this next chart will talk a little bit about how we navigate those sort of things. For most people who are neurotypical and otherwise functioning well, don't have any persistent sort of mental illness, we're there to help. I know a lot of you are thinking like, oh, I'm not qualified to do anything, but you actually are. And by the time you're done with your degree, you will be qualified to do a lot of stuff. And so if somebody has no history of mental illness, but they are struggling, whether it be with grief, whether it be with trauma, whether it be with other sort of things, these are all sort of things that we can help with. If somebody is mentally ill, it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't help them, right? If somebody is mentally ill and it's well controlled and it's under sort of whether it be psychotherapy, whether it be medication and other sort of stuff, they also have additional stresses of life. And in those sort of ways, we can help people who have good control over their mental health. Where we need to be really cautious is people who have persistent mental illness that is uncontrolled, oftentimes trying to help people navigate sort of the stress of life, housing, those sort of issues. If they have an uncontrolled mental illness, it's usually something that is sort of above our level. And so we always say, refer those out to people, social workers, or therapists that can help them navigate first sort of stabilizing their mental illness and then dealing sort of with the acute levels of stress that are coming up in their lives. Okay. A lot of this is just trying to help us to be able to differentiate between when should we help and then maybe have some support, and when should we say like, yeah, this is actually probably bigger than what I should be doing because I'm not a trained mental health professional. I'm not somebody who has the skills to navigate a lot of these bigger picture sort of things. And that's kind of helpful to us in terms of a guide for health education or health administration down the line. So this brings us up to WRAP. What is WRAP? So the WRAP is the Wellness Recovery Action Plan. It is a self-designed process that anyone can use. It was first developed in the late 90s by Dr. Mary Ellen Copeland, who is kind of the WRAP guru of the world. It was originally created for, by, and with people who were suffering with persistent mental illness, but it's used in a lot of different ways throughout time. It's been studied extensively. It's in the National Registry of Effective Programs, which is a really big deal because there's not a lot of programs that have enough evidence and research basis to get into the registry. And particularly when it comes to mental health, there's very, very few. And so this is one of the few solid sort of proven methods that says, yes, actually using a WRAP can help people to navigate their mental illness. They're easy to use and develop. You don't have to have any special training. You don't have to have any special skills or knowledge. Anybody can create a WRAP. It's individualized by you, for you. And so it's not some sort of generic program where you're just like, oh, well, maybe that works for me or maybe it doesn't. Everything in the WRAP is something that you create. And so that's why it's really powerful. It's also a really effective communication tool for you to be able to communicate with people who love you and are caring for you, particularly in times of high stress. It directly looks at sort of who you are as a person, what are some of the things that are going on, and helps you to navigate those sort of things and plan for effective management of different sort of things that come up. And when you create a WRAP, you're supposed to create it when you're doing fine, or even better than fine, really well. And so it's a good reminder when you look at it when you're not doing well to be like, hey, I created this when things were fine, and here's sort of what I had hoped for and what I had been able to accomplish when I was doing well. And so maybe if I follow these sort of things, I can get back to that sort of space. And so that's what a WRAP does. So for this semester, your largest sort of project will be the WRAP assignment. You're going to create a WRAP for yourself. I give one small caveat. If you have a lot of trauma and a lot of mental health issues and you feel like, you know what, it's just not going to be good for me to go through this process this semester, we can do a hypothetical person's sort of WRAP, but it really does help for you to do your own WRAP because it is a tool that you can use for the rest of your life. So there are lots of resources on Blackboard about WRAPs and the WRAP assignment, and you're going to be able to start working through that. The activity for this week is going to be starting getting your toolbox ready. So looking at sort of these basic things of what are the things that make me feel better? How do I navigate sort of life? From there, you're gonna include your wellness plan, your maintenance plans, your triggers, your warning signs, when things are breaking down and you're starting to feel like, I'm going towards a mental health crisis. If you were in crisis, how is that going to affect you? This is usually the hardest part because most of us have never been in a true crisis, and so there's a lot of hypothetical sort of things, such as if you did have to be hospitalized. First, everybody's like, no, I don't want to be hospitalized. Well, yeah, nobody wants to be hospitalized, trust me. But if you did have to be hospitalized for your own good, for your own safety, where would you want to go? Would you want to be here in Butte County, near Chico State? Would you want to be home if you're from not Butte County? Do you want to be near your family? Do you want to be out in the woods? Or do you want to be by the ocean? There's a lot of different sort of things. If you were trying to recover, what would be the best sort of place there? In terms of medication, some people are staunchly anti-medication. And if they say like, no, I don't want to take any medications, that should go in your wrap. Most people are willing to say, you know what, if it's something that's recommended by a doctor and we talk through it and it sounds like a good thing, then I am open to medications. If you've had a history with medications that have not worked for you in the past, if you've had allergic reactions or other sort of things, those would go into your crisis plan. And then the post-crisis is how do we get back to sort of normal life when we're not in crisis? And so it's pretty self-explanatory. You're going to have a couple of weeks to work on your first draft, and then I will give you some feedback. And then from there, you'll have a final draft that's due at the end of the semester. This is an intensive sort of process, and so I always tell people don't put it off to the end. It's not something you can whip up in just an hour or something. It talks about a lot of deep sort of stuff, and a lot of people have a lot of feelings while they're creating their wrap, and so you should start working on it now. Part of that is this week's activity, but one of the other things to get started on is your bio sketch. My bio sketch is on Blackboard for you to look at. And there are 2 student examples of some wraps in there, so you can kind of see what other students have created in the past. I've shared those with permission. And working through sort of telling your story of who am I, what are the more like sort of really important things that you would need to know about me if I were in a mental health crisis. Those are things that are important to get down, but they also take a really long time because people have to start going back into some maybe painful memories or trying to figure out how to share different sort of things. And so don't put it off. Start working on it very soon because it will pile up on you. And sometimes it's nice to be able to do a little bit at a time, take a break, go and do a little bit more, take a break, and work on it over time. Okay. Overall, this project is one of the biggest chunks of your semester. Your first draft will be worth 50 points, and then your final draft will be worth 100 points. And so we'll continue to talk about this, and I'll answer questions about wraps as they go along. Today's moment of Zen is acupressure. Acupressure is similar to acupuncture, which is what people do in terms of getting treatment with needles that are just slightly stuck underneath your skin. Acupressure, you don't have to do any sort of poking, and you can do it quite naturally by yourself. There are trained acupressure practitioners, but there's a lot of different ones that you can do just by yourself. And so there's a handout there that has 5 different acupressure points that are really good for stress management and stress relief. And so check those out, see if there's something that might be helpful to you and something you can incorporate into your daily sort of stress practices. All right, I will see you later.